Κύριε Π.Θ, κύριε Αναπληρωτά Π.Θ, σεβασμιότατη, κύριε Βουλευτή, κύριε Πρόεδρε των Τμήματων Θεολογίας, Κοινωνικής Θεολογίας και Χριστιανικού Πολιτισμού, κυρίες και κύριοι συνάδελφοι, κυρίες και κύριοι σύνεδροι, αγαπητές φοιτήτριες και αγαπητοί φοιτητές, φίλες και φίλοι, η Θεολογική Σχολή μας, μία από τις 5 ιδρυτικές σχολές του Αριστοτελείου Πανεπιστημίου Θεσσαλονίκης, συμπλήρωσε το 2022 80 χρόνια συνεχούς λειτουργίας και προσφοράς στα θεολογικά γράμματα, την ακαδημαϊκή κοινότητα και τον πολιτισμό. Και είναι ξεχωριστή η χαρά μας που ξεκινούμε τους εορτασμούς αυτής της επετείου με αυτό το άκρος ενδιαφέρον συνέδριο, σε συνεργασία με την Αρχιεπισκοπή Διατήτων και Μεγάλης Βρετανίας και καθόλου πρωτοβουλίες του Σεβασμιωτάτων και Δημοκρατία, στο κέντρο του οποίου βρίσκεται ο άνθρωπος. Πέρα, ότι μια τέτοια πρωτοβουλία ενισχύεται ακόμα περισσότερο από την θεώρηση που με επιμονή υποστηρίζει το κέντρο της χριστιανικής θεολογίας και ζωής και ο άνθρωπος. Εκείνη η θεολογική αγωνία δεν σταματά να διακηρύσει πως ο χριστιανικός κόσμος είναι ο κόσμος του θεοκεντρικού ανθρωπισμού. Και το λέω αυτό διότι δεν είναι λίγοι αυτοί, τόσο εντός όσο και εκτός του ίδιου της Ορθοδοξίας, οι οποίοι μεγεθύνουν τόσο τον Θεό και τον λειτουργικό του δοξασμό, γεγονός που τους κάνει να ξεχνούν τον άνθρωπο και συζητούν να οδηγούνται σε ένα σύγχρονο μονοψηφισμό. Ο Θεός για να σώσει τον άνθρωπο δεν έγινε σύστημα, δεν έγινε πολιτικός σχηματισμός, δεν έγινε φιλοσοφικός οργανισμός, αλλά έγινε άνθρωπος. Ο λόγος άρχισε γένετο και εσκήνωσε με μνήμη. Πράγμα που σημαίνει πως η Εκκλησία κινούμενη και ζώσα εν Χριστώ δεν μπορεί παρά να προσλαμβάνει συνεχώς τον άνθρωπο και να σταθμίζεται συνεχώς και αυτόν. Να προσλαμβάνει την τραγωδία και την γύμνια, να τον δίνει με τη στολή της αγάπης και της θυσίας. Να τον δίνει και να τον δίνεται. Διότι η πρόσκληση δεν είναι απλά και μόνο ένα εξωτερικό γεγονός συμπάθειας, αλλά κυρίως και κατεξοχήν ολοκληρωτική ενσωμάτωση, πραγματική ένωση, ολοκληρωτικός εμβαπτισμός στην Εκκλησία, δηλαδή στον Χριστό, όπου η κόλαση του ελληνικού ερευνητικού θεραπεύεται από τον παράδεισο της πνευματικής ζωής. Τον παράδεισο της φυσιολογίας του σώματος, όπου όταν ένα μέρος πονάει, πάσχει το όλο σώμα, και όταν θεραπεύεται ένα μέρος, θεραπεύεται και δοξάζεται το όλο σώμα. Δεν χωρά καμία αμφιβολία ότι σήμερα ζούμε στα πλαίσια ενός πολιτισμού της βίας. Ενός πολιτισμού στην καρδιά του οποίου λειτουργούνται οι μεγάλες ανομίες της εμπορίας ανθρώπων και της σύγχρονης δουλείας, η εξαναγκαστική εργασία στην οικονομία, η σεξουαλική εκμετάλλευση, η αφαίρεση οργάνων και εικόνων του σώματος, η θετική εργασία και πολλά άλλα. Ζούμε δηλαδή στα πλαίσια ενός πολιτισμού, στα αλήθεια μη πολιτισμού, ο οποίος βρίσκεται σε ευθείας σύγκρουση με τον οικουμενικό πολιτισμό της Άρτας, που στηρίζεται στους πυλώνες της γέννησης, του αδιάσματος και της πρόσωψης, αλλά και της θυσίας. Ζούμε στα πλαίσια ενός πολιτισμού, ο οποίος ονίζει το όνομα του κέντρους και της εξουσιαστικότητας. Γεγονός που γνωρίζει το Οικουμενικό Πατριαρχικό Στρατηγικός, το οποίο δια του Πατριάρχου δεν σταματάει με θυμίσεις παντού και πάντα, πως η Ορθόδοξη Εκκλησία, ό,τι λέει και ό,τι πράττει, το κάνει για την ανθρώπινη αξιοπρέπεια και τον αιώνιο προορισμό του ανθρώπου. Είναι αδύνατον η Εκκλησία να κλείσει τα μάτια στον κακό, να μείνει ασυγκίνητη στις κρατιές αγωνίες των ανθρώπων, των καταπιεσμένων, των θυμάτων της εκμετάλλευσης. Σε ένα παλιότερο κείμενο που έγραφα, πως ζούμε σε έναν κόσμο που φλέγεται. Δεν μπορούμε να κάνουμε πως δεν καταλαβαίνουμε. Της Ορθοδοξίας δεν της πρέπει μια τέτοια στάση. Δεν της πρέπει μια τέτοια έκπτωση. Η ιστορική ίδρυση της Εκκλησίας σχετίστηκε με τον Ευαγγελισμό του καινούριου. Ο Χριστός ήταν το απόλυτα καινούριο. Ένας καινούριος κόσμος από Ανατολή σε Δύση και από Βορρά σε Νότο. Οφείλουμε κινούμενοι στα χνάρια του Χριστού τη σήμερα, τη χθες αλλά και το Πασχά, να γίνουμε και πάλι επικίνδυνοι απέναντι σε κάθε αδικία. Σε κάθε απομείωση του ανθρώπινου προσώπου, σε κάθε ανθρωπολογικό φυσισμό. Και ας μην μας τολμάει η σύνδεση του χριστιανισμού με την επικινδυνότητα. Χριστιανισμός ακίνδυνος δεν υπάρχει. Χριστιανισμός ακίνδυνος δεν είναι χριστιανισμός. Σε αυτή την προσπάθεια οι χριστιανοί δεν μπορεί να είναι μόνοι. Είναι αναγκαία περισσότερο από ποτέ μια συνεργασία των θρησκειών του κόσμου, προκειμένου να δημιουργηθεί ένα κοινό μέτωπο απέναντι στην βαρβαρότητα της εκμετάλλευσης, απέναντι στη βία της αδιαφορίας και της σιωπής. Είναι αναγκαία μια τέτοια συνάντηση, προκειμένου οι θρησκείες του κόσμου από κοινού να αποτελέσουν τον αρμό της δημιουργίας, της ανοικοδόμησης ενός κοινωνικού κόσμου. Ενός κόσμου όπου η διαφορία, για την οποία μην τις ευσές και ο σεβασμιότατος, δεν θα αποτελεί το σύνταγμα της κοινωνίας. Συχνά ακούμε την άποψη πως οι θρησκείες πρέπει να μένουν στα όρια μιας κλειστής πνευματικότητας, στα όρια μιας αγοραφοβικής εσωτερικότητας. Υπάρχουν πολλοί, τόσο εντός της Εκκλησίας όσο και εκτός, παρότι διαφωνούν ριζικά σε πάρα πολλά θέματα, συμφωνούν στο γεγονός πως η Εκκλησία και ευρύτερα οι θρησκευτικές κοινότητες δεν έχουν θέση στη δημόσια δράση. Ο χώρος τους είναι η έρημος και ο τρόπος τους η άσκηση. Οφείλω όμως με έμφαση να σημειώσω πως στην ιστορία του πολιτισμού το εκτός πάντα βρίσκεται σε διάλογο με το εντός. Διάλογο ευθύ, διάλογο γλάκιο, άμεσο ή έμεσο, φανερό ή κρυφό, ουσιαστικό ή ανούσιο. Το εκτός και το εντός, βέβαια, ορίζεται πάντα από ένα σύνολο. Ένα σημείο 0 που αφορά τόσο στο εντός όσο και στο εκτός και χωρίς να αποτελεί μέρος του. Κρατά για τον εαυτό του μια ουδετερότητα. Συνιστά ουσιαστικά έναν χώρο ή τρόπο μετάστασης, αναγκαίο για την αλλαγή που το πέρασμά του θα εισφέρει. Σε αυτή την πλέον γραμμή τελειώνει η Ελλάδα, λέει ο Ηλίας Λογοθέτης, στο μετέωρο βήμα του λαού του πρώτου Ευαγγελίου. Αν κάνουμε ένα βήμα, είναι αλλού. Μεταποιώντας τη φράση, θα μπορούσαμε να πούμε και πολύ το λέμε, ότι σε αυτή την πλέον γραμμή τελειώνει η Εκκλησία και η θεολογία. Η άρνηση όμως διάβασης του συνόδου κρατά την ύπαρξη εντός του οικείου και γνωστού χώρου, δημιουργεί συνθήκες ασφάλειας, αλλά ταυτόχρονα μικραίνει τον κόσμο και ενισχύει την αίσθηση της αυτάρκειας. Επενδύει αν μη τι άλλο στην πολυδιαφημιζόμενη βεβαιότητα. Τη βεβαιότητα που ευαγγελίζει ο στρατευμένος φόβος και την οποία εγγυάται η απόρριψη της έκθεσής μας σε αυτό που δεν ξέρουμε. Παντού και πάντα ο φόβος της αλλαγής. Ο φόβος απώλειας του διαμορφωμένου και κλειστού. Και βάζει το χωρίς το εντός. Εισάγει το αίσθημα της ανασφάλειας, αλλά μαζί και την γοητεία του ταξιδιού και το ρίσκο που αυτό πάντα περιέχει. Ρίσκο συνάντησης, πλάτησης και επέκτασης. Βέβαια, είναι φορές που η κίνηση δεν γίνεται από τα μέσα προς τα έξω, αλλά από τα έξω προς τα μέσα. Όσο δύσκολο είναι να βγει κανείς από τον οικείο τόπο, εαυτός, χώρα, τρόπο, γλώσσα, θρησκεία, ασφάλεια, τόσο δύσκολο είναι να εισέλθει στον οικείο τόπο, όταν βρισκόμαστε στη χώρα μακράν. Περάσαμε τα σύνορα και είμαστε ακόμα εδώ, λέει ο Μαυρογιάννης στην Αθήνα. Μα πώς τα σύνορα πρέπει να περάσουμε για να πάμε στο σπίτι μας. Πράγμα που σημαίνει πως η μεγάλη δυσκολία βρίσκεται στην απόφαση της αλλαγής. Τη διάθεση να εγκαταλειφθεί η ασφάλεια της εκκλησίας, η βεβαιότητα της συνήθειας και ο άνθρωπος, καθώς που λέγει ο Νίκος Γαδίλη Πετρίκης στην μητέρα Θεσσαλονίκη, δια της κινήσεως να αφήσει την ψυχή του να γίνει παιχνίδι του ανέμου, προκειμένου να δει τη δόξα του πραγματικού. Ζώρικα πράγματα, που απαιτούν γυμνότητα, ευθύνη, επιμονή και υπομονή, τρέλα και κυρίως διάθεση σύγκρουσης με την αυτοερωτικότητα ενός εαυτού τακτοποιημένου μισθού. Απαιτεί πήγε η κίνηση ενάντια σε όσους πιστεύει ότι όλα είναι εδώ. Σεβασμιότατε, ήταν η εκλεγμένη, εκλεγμένη σύνδεση. Θα ρω πως ήρθε ο καιρός του ποιήσει. Και έχω την αίσθηση ότι τέτοιες πρωτοβουλίες, τέτοιες δράσεις επιτρέπουν την ανάσταση της ελπίδας, ακόμα και όταν αυτή μας εγκαταλείπει. Σεβασμιότατε, σας ευχαριστούμε από καρδιάς για τον δώρο που μας κάνετε. Το δώρο της συμβολής σε μια μεγάλη προσπάθεια με νόημα και όραμα. Η Εκκλησία να ανοίξει στον άνθρωπο. Η θεολογία να ανοίξει στον άνθρωπο. Να εγκαταλείψουμε αυτόν τον κλειστό μας εαυτό. Σας ευχαριστούμε επίσης για την ειρηνική συμμετοχή σας στους εορτασμούς. 80 χρόνια θεολογικής σχολής, την οποία γνωρίζετε πολύ καλά, όπως και οι περισσότεροι εκ των ιεραρχών που βρίσκονται ανάμεσά μας. Θα ήθελα από αυτή τη θέση να ευχαριστήσω όλους όσους κοπίασαν για τη διοργάνωση του συνεδρίου, την επιστημονική μας επιτροπή, τους προέδρους, τους αγαπητούς προέδρους των δύο τμήματων, τους φοιτητές μας, τους εργαζόμενους, διότι τέτοιες προσπάθειες παίρνουν κόπο και ανθρώπου, την προϊσταμένη της γραμματείας της Πολιτείας, την κυρία Σιμεωνίδη, και όλους εσάς που είστε σήμερα εδώ, προκειμένου να μοιραστούμε αγωνίες, καημούς, αλλά και την ελπίδα, η οποία μπορεί να γίνει ο άρτος και ο ύμνος του καθημερινού μας ευχαριστιακού δίκτυου. Να μας έχει ο Θεός γερός, καλή αρχή και καλά αποτελέσματα.
Ευχαριστούμε κύριε Κοσμίδωρα. Καλείται στο βήμα ο πρίτανης του Αριστοτελείου Πανεπιστημίου της Θεσσαλονίκης, καθηγητής κύριος Νικόλαος Παπαϊωάννου, για έναν σύντομο χαιρετισμό.
Σεβασμιότατοι, κύριε Πρίτανη, κύριε Κοσμίδωρα, κύριε Πρόεδρε, κυρίες και κύριοι συνάδελφοι, κύριε Κοσμίδωρα, honorable guests. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and to give my greetings to this great symposium, to this great event. But allow me for these thoughts to turn on to Greek, because we are in the Greek University, so we have to appreciate this abundance. Κυρίες και κύριοι, στην τοποθέτηση του κυρίου Κοσμίδωρα, μπορούσε κανένας να καταλάβει την προσέγγιση της θεολογικής σχολής απέναντι στα προβλήματα της κοινωνίας. Από την εισήγησή με κέντρισε η έκφραση οι θρησκείες όλου του κόσμου από κοινού να. Αυτό λοιπόν δείχνει την ανθρωποκεντρική, την κοινωνικοκεντρική αντίληψη που έχει η Ορθόδοξη Θρησκεία, αλλά και την αντιμετώπιση που έχουν οι διδάσκοντες στην Ορθόδοξη Θρησκεία στους νέους ανθρώπους και το πώς βλέπουν το κοινωνικό κύκλισμα. Βρισκόμαστε σε μια κοινωνία με συχνές αλλαγές, με καθημερινά προβλήματα, που σχετίζονται με το πράγμα, που σχετίζονται με την μετανάστευση. Όλα αυτά είναι αποτέλεσμα δικών μας δράσεων. Το ζητούμενο σε αυτά δεν είναι μόνο τα αποτελέσματα που θα δώσουν οι πολιτικές δράσεις. Είναι και τα αποτελέσματα, κατά τη γνώμη μου, που πρέπει εμείς ως άνθρωποι και εμείς ως κοινωνία να δουλέψουμε για να μπορούν αυτά να κλείνονται. Μην ξεχνάμε την παρουσία των Ελλήνων στο πρόσφατο σύμφωνο της Τουρκίας. Δεν κοιτάμε θρησκεία, δεν κοιτάμε έθνος, κοιτάμε τον άνθρωπο. Και θεωρώ ότι αυτές οι δράσεις, κύριε Κοσμίδωρα, κύριοι πρόεδροι, κυρίες και κύριοι συνάδελφοι, τιμούν την θεολογική σχολή του Αριστοτελείου Πανεπιστημίου. Είναι η θεολογική σχολή με τα δύο τμήματα και τη μία κατεύθυνση, με τη μεγάλη ακαδημαϊκή και κοινωνική προσφορά, το τμήμα θεολογίας, κοινωνικής θεολογίας και η κατεύθυνση μουσουλμανικών σπουδών, που από την φοιτηση επιδρά και δημιουργεί μια εθνικής ανάγκης δράση. Θεωρώ λοιπόν ότι είναι τύχη για το Πανεπιστήμιο η θεολογική σχολή να πρωτοπορεί σε τέτοιου είδους ανθρωποκεντρικές και κοινωνικοκεντρικές εκδηλώσεις και να αναδεικνύει την Αποστολική Εκκλησία, να αναδεικνύει τη θρησκεία μας. Και γι' αυτόν τον λόγο, κλείνοντας, λέω, κυρίες και κύριοι, είναι τιμή μας. Αυτή είναι η θεολογική σχολή, όχι κύριε Κοσμίδωρα 80 χρόνια, 160 και όσα θέλει ο Θεός. Θερμά συγχαρητήρια σε όλους τους τελεστές, τιμή η παρουσία όλων ημών των συναδέλφων στο Αριστοτέλειο Πανεπιστήμιο της Ελλάδας.
Ευχαριστούμε κύριε Πρίτανη. Ξεκινάμε το πρώτο πανέλ με τίτλο «Μετανάστευση, συγκρούσεις και εμπορία ανθρώπων. Migration, Conflict and Human Trafficking». Συντονιστής είναι ο καθηγητής κ. Νικόλαος Παπαϊωάννου, πρόεδρος του Τμήματος της Ολυμπίας. Κύριε Πρόεδρε.
Καλημέρα σας. Αγαπητές και αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, κύριε Πρόεδρε του Σώματος Κοινωνικής Ιδεολογίας, αγαπητές φίλες και αγαπητοί χθες, με μεγάλη χαρά συνοδεύω αυτή την πρώτη συνεδρίαση του σημαντικού συνεδρίου που ουσιαστικά εγκαινιάζει μια σειρά ενεργήτων εκδηλώσεων της Θεολογικής Σχολής, γιορτάζοντας τα 80 χρόνια. Η Θεολογική Σχολή, οι θεολογικές σχολές, ήταν από τις πρώτες σχολές που ιδρύθηκαν στην δημιουργία του ελληνικού κράτους και κατ' επέκταση των δύο πανεπιστημίων, τόσο της Αθήνας και τόσο της Θεσσαλονίκης. Αυτό σημαίνει πως η θεολογική επιστήμη και ο ρόλος των θεολογικών σχολών είναι ιδιαίτερα σημαντικός για την ελληνική κοινωνία και ακριβώς καλλιεργούν όλο αυτό το πολιτιστικό πλούτο της Ελλάδος, ο οποίος περιέχει τον πλούτο της ορθόδοξης παράδοσης και της ορθόδοξης θεολογίας. Η πρώτη της συνεδρίας λέγεται στα αγγλικά, όπου θα συνεχίσουμε στην αγγλική γλώσσα. Your Eminences, distinguished guests, your Vice Director, dear colleagues, dear students, it's my pleasure to proceed in this first session of our Congress, and I would like to introduce you our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Carol Murphy, who is an associate professor of criminology and sociology at St. Mary's University and director of the A.P.Θ Center for Research on Slavery, Exploitation, and Abuse. Carol played a key role in establishing the center, ensuring focus on victim/survivor support needs, practice, intervention, and policy impact. She is especially committed to developing training for practitioners who work with victims of abuse and exploitation and exploring opportunities for survivors and experts by experience to develop their full potential. The main research interests are in human trafficking, modern slavery, exploitation and abuse, and examining intersections with social problems, inequalities, addiction, and health mental health issues. This is Carol Murphy, Floris Jones, and we have 20 minutes, otherwise in 10 minutes, you will show us yellow cards.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this conference. I'm really delighted to be here and being in the methodology and to be part of theology and to celebrate with you the sweet painting. And so today I'm going to be about the study that I led on last year, 2021-2022, and the research was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council through the Modern Slavery and Human Rights Policy and Evidence Centre. I was approached to be partner in this service by an NGO in London called Justice and Care, who work with victims. And they asked me to take the lead in examining the pathways to support for British victims of modern slavery. So this is an area of research that there wasn't much known about. There was quite a lot of anecdotal evidence from practitioners. There was identified a need for a more in-depth study. So the objectives of the research were really to identify the gaps in the knowledge that we have about British victims or domestic victims of trafficking, to understand their needs, to identify the barriers they have, to accessing support and also to understand their experiences in the criminal justice system. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later on. And ultimately, what we wanted to do was to improve knowledge about what support for British nationals should look like to enable their recovery and prevent re-trafficking. One of the things that I want to really set out very early on is that this study is not about creating any sort of hierarchy of needs of domestic victims over foreign national victims. It's just about recognising that domestic victims have access to statutory support that is not being offered to them. It's recognising the need for professional curiosity and understanding of the indicators of vulnerability in the lives of young people. This is young British people prior to being exploited. What are the missed opportunities, which is one of the things that came out of this research. And of course, the goal of this is about preventing future exploitation, because it's one thing, as we all know, to identify and try to support and protect victims, but it would be really good if we could be in a position to prevent their exploitation in the first place. We used a mixed methods approach. We did surveys with practitioners, with criminal justice professionals. We interviewed practitioners, police officers, local authorities and survivors to understand the kind of barriers and gaps in support for British victims. As you can see from the slide, although research on modern slavery has increased substantially in the past 10, 15, 20 years, few studies have focused specifically on the experiences of domestic victims, and that might be the same here in Greece. As you can see from the statistics on the slide, the numbers of British victims on referred international referral mechanism have increased year over year since 2018. They have been the highest number of referrals. And so the UK government introduced the national referral mechanism in 2009. About 13 years on, there is much recognition that it remains flawed. So there is a study, for example, that shows that of over 200 closed cases involving adult potential victims, police and other first responders were more likely to refer foreign nationals into the national referral mechanism than British victims. So to summarise this section, British victims are not being recognised as victims, they're not being referred into the national referral mechanism, and if they are falling through gaps in support. British victims are often coerced and controlled, and to be involved in criminal exploitation, for example, drug trafficking and other forms of criminal activity, but they're not being recognised as victims. Although there is a statutory fortified defence in the Modern Slavery Act, and this is not being recognised by Crown Prosecution Service. Also, there's no definition of criminal exploitation, and this results in inconsistency in application of the term when it comes to the criminal justice process. I just want to recognise before I move on that this study has limitations in that with the scoping study it's very quick, very short, over 1 year. That might seem like a long time, but when you're doing a study like this and you're doing quite a few interviews and surveys, it's quite a short time to really get to the depth of the issue. So all we can offer here are preliminary insights, and we use snowball sampling, so we can't generalise these findings out to the wider population. But we do hope that this will be the beginning of research on this topic, and so we recommend that there will be follow-up research. We also didn't do any comparative aspects. We just didn't have the capacity to do that in this study. But what we wanted to do, as I said, is to provide initial insights into this topic. We did interviews, as I said, 36 practitioners, 20 criminal justice professionals, and 7 survivors. The most common type of exploitation reported in our study was criminal exploitation, followed by forced labour, followed by sexual exploitation, and then So I wanted to kind of say this to highlight that actually, you know, and I think it's shifting, but the focus on sexual exploitation and the form of human trafficking and modern slavery really does need to shift to other forms of exploitation, including criminal and forced labour. So one of the questions we asked in the survey were, what were the 3 most common areas of support needs for British victims? And the responses showed that mental health support, housing and accommodation, and substance misuse support were the 3 most common needs. These themes that were identified across all of the data are consistent from the interviews and from the surveys. Beginning with their experience before exploitation, the findings identified significant vulnerabilities and missed opportunities to protect British nationals from future exploitation, including not identifying them as victims, expecting compliant behaviour, which correlates to notions of fairness and victimhood. And I had a conversation on the bus coming in here that might shed some light on that. The thing about British victims is that they are British, they've grown up in the British system, they understand, to a certain extent, they understand their rights. Victim who needs to be rescued. That doesn't undermine the fact that they actually have very high support needs, as identified in the surveys and the interviews. So the main barriers to accessing support for domestic victims is around victims not being identified as victims because they're British, and they're not being identified. And I'll go into that a bit more when I talk about the findings from the interviews, but also that they sometimes have got mental health problems, neurodiverse conditions, or physical impairments, or a combination of these. One of the kind of key findings from the research really was around missed opportunities, as you can see in the themes here on the screen. And the 3 main themes were about insecure environments, being exploited, and being British in the national referral mechanism. And under each of these themes, the key takeaway is about the missed opportunity to prevent exploitation, to identify British victims as victims, to protect them, and to support them in the NRM. For this presentation, I will speak about themes 1 and 2. So in terms of missed opportunities to prevent, one of the key kind of features that was identified here, and both from police officers and from other support practitioners, was about missing episodes. And this is missing episodes from both the school, from home, from foster homes. Many of these young people had spent periods of their lives in foster or care homes. They'd also gone missing from school, missing from home. Sometimes those missing episodes are not being followed up. So although people were identifying missing as a problem, there was no follow-up from police or from social services. The police are very clear here in the 2 quotes on the screen. You can see that one of the involvement from the police officers was trying to find out where are these young people going. They're going missing for months at a time, and there is a risk here of them being exploited, criminal exploitation, and indeed in sexual exploitation. So the potential link between missing episodes and the risk of exploitation is being recognised more often, but it is not widespread and needs more kind of focus. The other issue was around missed opportunities to protect people. So despite contact with education, criminal justice professionals, social services, mental health and health services, all survivors in the study reported their exploitation was missed in all encounters in a range of settings, and/or including a lack of response to complex needs. One survivor recounted that the police had visited his exploitation site. He was being exploited in labour exploitation situation. The police visited 2 or 3 times, but his living arrangements in a caravan on the site, or his access to food, water, sanitary facilities were never questioned. Another survivor under the care of social services during his exploitation told his social worker about the situation he was in, and she said to him that he tends to fantasize and that a boy of his age couldn't live that type of lifestyle. He recalls that the experience also broke a lot of trust in his and his withdrawal from support services. Understandably, many respondents identified missed opportunities to protect them and prevent exploitation as a reason to distrust support services when accessing support post-exploitation. In other cases, for example, in mental health or general health settings, I have examples here from 2 respondents. One who had an eating disorder, was self-harming, was depressed, is being supported by a service in the UK specifically for supporting young people with mental health issues. And she said, looking back now, she was depressed, maybe it was a trauma response to the situation of her sexual exploitation. But obviously I didn't disclose that to anyone. So you might argue, well, she chose not to disclose it. What I would argue back is that it is the responsibility of professionals in these services to show interest and professional curiosity and to care for human beings sitting in front of them who are exposing these kinds of trauma, post-trauma events, and to explore that in a trauma-informed manner. Likewise, this other young woman, by the time she was 18, had had 4 pregnancies, 2 abortions. And she was seen by the same medical practitioner in a couple of these incidents, but nobody took any safeguarding procedures around this young woman. So she was really kind of sent back out into the world, back out in a situation of extreme vulnerability, now with 2 young children to look after. The other issue is about substance use and unsafe environments. So British victims were identified in the interviews and the surveys as more likely to be using substances. The problem with this is that it makes them very much vulnerable to not only exploitation in the form of drug trafficking, but also exploitation in terms of the phrase, I don't know if you will have heard of, but it's cuckooing, and it's based on the idea that cuckoo goes into another bird's nest, it takes over. So criminal gangs are taking over the homes of these people, some of them substance misuse, some of them with mental health and other conditions, and taking over their homes and using them as places to sell drugs. And they're often abusing these people with violence, coercion, control, and sexual assault. One of our respondents also reported that sometimes the kind of exploitation can be embedded in some communities where there's a lot of poverty and inequality. So the cuckooing and the criminal exploitation is embedded in the community, so it can be very difficult for people to resist that and to remove themselves from that scenario. So for British victims, even if they are referred into the national referral mechanism, the knowledge among frontline workers is very limited about what British nationals are referred to. So we did ask the question about how many people felt equipped to support British victims, and although 2/3 of them said they did feel equipped, 1/3 of them said they didn't. Now remember, these are people who are self-selected. We contact them through our networks. they self-selected to be involved in this study about British victims. And I think that says a lot about the gaps in knowledge and understanding about supporting domestic victims in the context of the fact that the Modern Slavery Act was set up at a time when human trafficking was seen as a migration issue only. And so there's a quote on the screen here about one person who only supported one British survivor. But they believe that many of British victims do not agree to referral due to stigma and shame about their situation. They've been let down by UK processes. These are very big long quotes here. I'm happy to share the slides another time because I haven't got time to go through them, but just to say that they've been let down by these systems throughout their lives, and this is the difference between them and international victims. And the practitioners reported once bitten, twice tried. They've already been let down by social services throughout their lives, and they come to the national referral mechanism, and they just see it as one more system that's being set up to fail them. And this quote on the right is the person who said, for British victims, it's like a cycle of closed doors. They just get passed from one service to another. So I mentioned professional curiosity before. One of the huge gaps in the identified in the study was the need for training, for people to understand what rights British victims have in the British already available outside of the NRM, as well as their entitlements in the NRM. And these were identified by the police, by the practitioners themselves. We don't know them. We don't know how to deal with this cohort of people. So there's a real need to improve knowledge and to increase the training. And as I mentioned before, to try and inculcate this idea of professional curiosity. How can we go beyond just somebody who says, you know, well, no, I don't want to talk about that. We need to kind of use our trauma-informed knowledge to create a better trusting relationship with people. So in terms of the bridges to recovery, I've talked about missed opportunities, the need for coordinated action, multi-service partnerships have been identified as a good way of tackling this, bringing people together from different sectors, focus on prevention through a public health approach, offer safe and secure accommodation and access to mental health support. And one of the things I think really important things is to include survivor voice in this. Listen to what survivors are saying, listen to their experiences, engage with consultants in research, engage with consultants in projects. And then I will just leave you with the key recommendations. I think I've spoken about them already through the presentation. I hope it wasn't too rushed. I just feel like there's so much to say, and I don't have time to say it. I've been given my 3 minutes warning about 5 minutes ago, so I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Murphy. I thought we will have some time at the end of the presentation for discussion. So please give your questions. Ίσως θα έχουμε λίγο χρόνο στο τέλος της εισηγήσεων για τις ερωτήσεις να δούμε. Κρατήστε τις ερωτήσεις σας για τους ομιλητές μας. Θα ευχαριστήσουμε και την κυρία Δεβέλη. Και βεβαίως ξέχασα να καλωσορίσω και τον αγαπητό Λιδάκη της πόλης. Νομίζω είναι η πρώτη φορά που έχουμε Λιδάκη στο Πανεπιστήμιο. Welcome. Επίσης, στον Άγιο Αμβολίου, το είναι welcome to our meeting. Δεν βλέπω και λίγο σας είναι ο πλάνο. Ελάτε μπροστά. So, our second speaker comes from UK, although she is Greek, is Dr. Evangelia Eliadou, holds a PhD in social policy and criminology from the Open University in UK. Her PhD research is a self-reflexive ethnographic account of the EU responses towards the refugee crisis and refugees live
experiences of violence on the Greek island of Lesbos. Tina has conducted her postdoctoral research at the Department of Politics, University of Surrey, on migration, governance, vulnerability, and refugees' lived experiences in refugee camps in Greece. She has also worked for more than a decade as an NGO practitioner in detention centers and refugee camps in Greece and Lesbos Island by providing social support, border crossings, survivors of torture, human trafficking, and sexual abuse. Currently, she is a project worker for a UK-based charity supporting migrant women in immigration detention centers in the UK. She has held monograph titled Wars, Arms and Everyday Violence at Prison Island in Europe, which was published by Bristol University Press next July. She represents Fiscus for Social Justice and NGOs. So, Cecilia, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, it's a really honor to be here today to present my research on the refugees in Greece and the island of Lesbos. I would like to thank the Evidence Agency for Nikita, as well as the conference organization committee of jazz and theologies of theater and A.P.Th, the faculty of theology of the Aristotle University, for inviting me to speak about this important event on the human trafficking. So this presentation is based on an extensive ethnographic research, which was carried out between 2015 and 2022 as part of my PhD postdoctoral ethnographic research on Greece and the Lesbos on the refugee crisis. The continuum of violence and the refugees' lived experiences of violence. My research is supported by 85 interviews with polygloters, activists, NGO staff, the Greek and the EU authorities. Today, however, I'm going to focus on human trafficking in the context of the refugee crisis. So in the first part of the presentation, I will give a short background on the refugee crisis focusing on Lesbos Island. I will then move to discuss the EU responses towards the refugee crisis. Here, I will briefly refer to the policies and practices which were implemented to prevent border deaths and suffering, as well as to tackle the trafficking networks. And finally, I will discuss the consequences in human cost of these responses. And although the consequences upon border crossers' lives are multiple, here I will only refer to human trafficking. So in 2015, approximately 1 million migrants reached Europe by sea, via Greece and Italy. Approximately 500,000 migrants reached Europe via Lesbos. And over the course of 2015, many people lost their lives in an attempt to seek international protection in Europe. The Aegean Sea became a deadly border, and Lesbos became the epicenter of the refugee crisis. In the aftermath of the 2015 refugee crisis, the EU policy makers, through its own statement, agreed on the following: to protect irregular migrants' lives from the criminal trafficking networks, caring for the border-related deaths, to prevent more deaths between the land and sea border crossroads, and to restore public order. These commitments were achieved in a series of ways, and notably through the externalization and internalization of the EU borders, the erection of fences and walls at the EU borders, a humanitarian interventions through aid, medical and legal, by non-governmental organizations and the United Nations, as well as an intervention of security actors such as Frontex and NATO. The externalization of border policies and practices are important because, as I'm going to argue in a while, they turn the border crossings into more risky and perilous, and they increased border crossers' dependence on smugglers and traffickers. The externalization involves the expansion of border controls and policing beyond the EU, enhanced maritime patrol operations within the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea, and agreements with non-EU countries such as Turkey to manage the asylum procedures outside the EU borders. Through these agreements, non-EU countries such as Turkey, Afghanistan, and Libya are designated as safe countries of origin, safe third countries or first country of asylum. These non-EU countries, which were traditionally considered transit countries, in exchange for financial aid, capacity building, technical support for building infrastructures, have been turned into destination countries and buffer zones by preventing irregular migrants from entering the EU. The proliferation, securitization, and militarization of border controls beyond the EU territory made border crossings even more spatial and fragmented, complex, non-linear, and lengthy, through which border crossers move, start, wait, and again move. As social anthropologist A.P.Th argues, migrants occupy a liminal space as they attempt to cross national borders, and thus secure shelter, eat, and make incremental movements towards their destination. Within this fragmented spatial and temporal liminality, violence is endemic and exacerbates by frequently taking grotesque and obscene forms. Hence, violence or the fear of violence becomes a central mechanism through which vulnerabilities are produced and profits are derived. According to Keita, a border crosser interviewed from Syria that I met on Lesbos, we lived in a smuggler's house and we were robbed twice, thereby people who pretended to be the police. They threatened us that if we don't give them our money, they would deport us. From fear that we were going to be deported, we gave them all our money. One guy, from fear that he's going to be deported, he jumped from the window and broke his wasted legs. I was about to do the same thing, but they did not let me do it. They grabbed me, and these people were not the police, they were the mafia who were collaborating with the smuggling. As Amnesty International notes, refugees and migrants have become a source to be exploited, a commodity around which an entire industry has grown. In lack of safe passages and other alternative legal routes to Europe, smugglers and traffickers become key actors, a necessary evil for border crossers, because without them facilitating the journey cannot be fulfilled. Smugglers and traffickers know the tricks, they have the know-how, they know the pathways through the mountains and the safe houses along the way. Smugglers and traffickers are key actors who play a pivotal role in enabling the border regime. Mokhtar, a border crosser interviewed from Syria, told me that his smuggler led him and his group to stay to a safe house without the food and water for days. The smuggler took us to a house and we stayed there for 1 week. It was an abandoned place with holes on walls. You know, in this place you might find yourself sleeping where sheep are living. In this house there was no water to drink and the smuggler gave us just Coca-Cola. No food, just Coca-Cola, and you know how bad Coca-Cola is for an empty stomach, particularly if you have not eaten anything for days. I have never drank Coca-Cola again since then. Without having any other options of following safe passages which lead to Europe, border crossers resort to the smuggling and trafficking networks, make unbearable coerced choices, and eventually are exposed to further violence. By saying unbearable coerced choices, I do not mean that border crossers are powerless, passive victims like mobilities in free will. The survival strategies that they adopt throughout their border trajectories, as well as their defiance of the border regime, shows agency and autonomy. But coerced choices refer to the role of consent and coercion, extortion, bondage and debt, as dominant features of the unauthorized border crossing, Because due to the overpriced border journeys, that is a means for border process to finance and secure a place within a car and lower your border, which leads to Europe. That, however, generates the obligation of paying it off. Therefore, all this play a crucial role in the formulation of border process autonomous choices and thus their consent. As Julia Davidson argues, financing migration through debt can be an active choice without also being a voluntary or autonomous choice, and migrants' decisions to take on debts that will imply heavy restrictions on their freedom are taken in the context of migration and other policies that severely constrain their alternatives. So what I found during my research was various forms of debt for which border process were indebted, obliged and exploited to pay off with various forms of economic transactions so as to be allowed to cross the borders. Three dominant types of transaction and extortion based on debt and the obligation to pay off are the financial, labor, and sexual debts. Here, border process bodies and lives are playing a crucial role as objects, commodities, or tokens of economic transaction and manipulation. Border crossings are fragmented, expensive, and not always successful, which means one might have to repeat the various journey several times in order to reach one's destination. Frequently, border crossers are coerced to sell all their belongings, their allotments, and homes in order to finance their journey. Also, an Afghan female interviewee told me that in order to gather the amount of money for the journey to Europe, her family had to sell all of their belongings in Afghanistan. So the debt not only burdens the travelers, but also burdens those who are left behind, the family and friends. And therefore, not paying off the debt, it's not an option. Due to the fact that border crossings are lengthy and fragmented, many of the border crossers are interviewed, had to work for days, months, and even for years in border zones and transit countries in order to gather the money to pay off the smugglers. Many border crossers are not able to pay the tariff to the smuggler and commit to pay off their debt when they reach Europe. Paying off the debt is inevitable. Smugglers and traffickers under the use of the threat of violence against border crossers themselves and family members secure the collection of the debts. Javid, a border crosser interviewed from Afghanistan, could not pay his smuggler in advance, so he had to make a deal with him and pay in installments. I paid the smuggler half of the money in cash, and the other half was paid by both my parents and me when I found work. I paid myself 400 euros to the smuggler when I reached Greece. You cannot avoid paying the smuggler because they can keep you hostage. They might even track your fingers or ears. Smugglers are capable of doing anything. They have people everywhere, and they can find you and harm you or the members of your family. The financial harm which are inflicted upon border crossers in order to undertake the journey to Europe cannot easily be measured, estimated, and known. A common feature of labor debt is that many border crossers are coerced to work as recruiters and facilitators in exchange for a free pass in a boat which leads to Europe. Whereas an Afghan border crosser interviewee told me that I worked for days in Turkey, but I could not gather the money that I needed for the journey. I started then working as a recruiter for the smuggler. I had agreed with the smuggler to recruit 10 people for him, and he promised that if I do this, he would send me to Greece for free. I did that, but he did not send me to Greece as he had promised. Then the smuggler told me to find 5 more people. I managed to find 3. The smuggler found 1 more, and the 5th person was me. Thus, he finally sent me to Greece. Other border crossers agreed to drive the boat during the unauthorized crossing, risking arrest by the authorities and being charged with many years of incarceration for trafficking, or in cases of shipwrecks for risking lives. As Conrad and other interviewee notes, often the smugglers ask the refugee to drive the boat from Turkey to Greece in order to be allowed to travel for free. The boat usually operates with an engine, and the only condition is the refugees to touch with his own hands the boat's steering wheel. However, refugees who are arrested by the police driving the boat are punished. They are arrested and sent to jail as traffickers. These persons are going to prison for nothing. As they are not smugglers, they are refugees who simply do not have money to pay the smuggler, and they are desperate to enter Europe. So in lack of any other option, due to destitution, asymmetrical power relations, and dependency, border crossers are coerced or extorted to finance the journey by providing sexual services for the smugglers and traffickers. Given the fact that the border crossers do not have options, and thus the element of coercion and extortion is central and dominant within all aspects of their multiple journeys to Europe, this practice of sex is considered as rape. As social anthropologist Sarah Ravi argues, border rapes often persist as part of a border type, and border transgressions are rapes to get permission to cross. It must be noted that border crossers often are not offered the option to consent and finance the journey through sexual debt, and are brutally raped from both station to border station, before and route and after the journey. As Tassos, one of the volunteers I interviewed on Lesbos, told me, raped women were so many that after a point we were distributing abortion pills to almost all refugee women arriving. The aforementioned forms of death are not the only coerced choices which border crossers are forced to make in order to finance the journey to Europe and survive. Other forms of debt is the organ debt. Border crossers, in order to finance their journey, or generally in order to survive, are coerced to consent to organ removal, which are broadly circulated and sold as commodities in the organ trafficking and transplantation industry. Furthermore, more border crossers find themselves indebted or bonded in coerced labor in the agricultural sector, fishing industry, get enslaved in forced marriages. Children on the move are enslaved in sexual labor and trafficking. So to conclude, trafficking is one of the most profitable organized crimes, along with the illegal trade of weapons and drugs. Paradoxically, however, this trade, as social anthropologist Ruben Anderson notes, grows alongside tougher border control. Therefore, it is important to provide safe passages to border crossers to reach Europe, as border crossers' dependency on smuggling and trafficking networks would be greatly mitigated if there were safe passages and other alternative legal channels that leads to Europe. Also, the tragic loss of life and human suffering would also be reduced if there were safe passages that leads to Europe. And as Doctors Without Borders note about safe passages, legal crossing of sea and land borders should be authorized into and inside the EU and transportation facilitated. Humanitarian assistance and access to functioning asylum procedures should be provided at entry points and along migratory routes. Dignified reception conditions have to be offered for all. Thank you very much for the attention.
For interesting presentation. Brought us memories from the past, not for the Greek society, for the Greek state, and for keeping the time. So our next speaker is Dr. Ronan Lee, a doctoral prize fellow at the local University of London Institute for Media and Creative Industries, where his research focuses on the Rohingya genocide, case speech, migration, and asylum politics. Ronan's book, Myanmar's Rohingya Genocide, Identity, History, and Hate Speech, was awarded the 2021 Early Career Engineering Scholar Prize by the International Association of Genocide Scholars. Ronan also has a professional background in politics, media, and public policy. He was formerly a Queensland State Member of Parliament. Dr. Lee, the floor is yours.
Well, hi, it's absolutely fantastic to be with you. Let me just start by thanking the Archdiocese, Your Eminence Peters, and the University for hosting us today. I'm thrilled to be here with you. It's just such an important subject to be discussing, and I want to talk a little bit about what leads to some of the situations. I want to talk about the political background, consequences of that, and I want to talk about the steps that take people from being part of a society to being victims of the sorts of forced migration that we're talking and trafficking that we're talking about today. I mean, let me start with a map. Can I ask who's travelled in this region? Who's been to Myanmar, Burma, as we sometimes call it? Anyone here? Not many. Okay, so let me start with a little bit of history and a little bit of sort of explain the demographics. So obviously, many people will know Myanmar, it's officially Myanmar, but many people still know it as Burma. I'll use both those terms sort of sometimes interchangeably. There's reasons for that we don't want to get into today in terms of how the country's named and those sorts of things. You can see its location in that part of Southeast Asia that's adjacent to South Asia. So it's part of ASEAN, the association, but its neighbours, you can see Bangladesh, India as well, although wraps around, and also shares a border with China and Thailand. So geopolitically quite important. It's at the north of the Bay of Bengal. It's a Buddhist country overwhelmingly. So we're talking 90% of the population, about 55 million people there. So it's not small. 90% are Buddhist today. There's a Christian population of about 5%, maybe as high as 8%. The demographic may be up today. Overwhelmingly Buddhist, but not exclusively so. And historically, has not been exclusively so. So, who am I talking about today? I'm talking about this group of people. This is the Rohingya Muslim community. They are a Muslim minority who live overwhelmingly, so their ancestral lands. This orange part of the map. So Rakhine State, sometimes still known as Arakan, which is its historical name. That'll become important in a couple of minutes. Maybe unclear from the map, but you can work out this line is a mountain range. So what you're looking at here is central Burma, central Myanmar, separated from Rakhine State by a mountain range, but there's no mountain range between Rakhine State all the way up the coast into Bengal. It's Bangladesh and Bengal. So historically, connections between Rakhine State and Bengal much stronger than connections between Rakhine State and Myanmar, quite firm. So over the last 2,000 years, that area was more or less much closer connected with what we call Bangladesh and India than with Myanmar. Now that changed at one point. That changed in 1784. The Burmese invaded and incorporated Rakhine State into their country. So what they were incorporating was the not just the Rohingya's ancestral lands. What they were incorporating was a thriving, independent trading kingdom called Arakan, which for the previous thousands of years, been independent. It wasn't part of Bengal, wasn't part of Burma. It was its own thing. Trading with the world. It was quite a significant trading kingdom in the 1600s. This is a drawing. This is a picture from painting from the 1600s. the capital city of Arakan had a population at that time of about 160,000 people. Now, for comparison, at that time, London's population would have been probably under 200,000. Paris, maybe a little bit over 200,000. So commensurate with the world's biggest cities, and Naples, I think, was acknowledged the biggest city of the world at that time, in the 200,000. So comparable with the world's biggest cities. And what was fascinating about this place, it was a Muslim and Buddhist kingdom. It was multi-ethnic, it was multi-religious. So a Buddhist society, a Buddhist kingdom invades a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. And that's what's important for us to understand today. We're going to talk about the Rohingya community, a Muslim minority that we know as victims. And these are the sorts of images that you're used to when you see the news, you see the Rohingya. It's a victim group that's excluded from society, that's not part of society, and we regard them in those terms, and we look at them and we think it's very unfortunate that bad things are happening to this victim group. But it wasn't always like that. These are people who were part of their own independent society, a society that was multi-ethnic, multi-religious. At various times, the king would take Muslim titles, coins with sort of Muslim writing. Other times, Buddhist titles. It was a thriving kingdom, and it was multi-ethnic, multi-religious. That's the thing I think just really need to emphasize. So let's remember that when we think about the victim group that we're going to talk about. This is the first documentary evidence that we've got. This is a colonial British document because, of course, Burma became part of the British colonial effort. And this is a document from the 1700s where a British geographer is talking about visiting Burma and meeting with a group of people describing themselves as Rohingya. So very important for the history of the country, and also important to position this group as part of the society, and having been part of the society for hundreds of years, they're indigenous. One of the most prominent buildings in the centre of Sittwe, which is the state capital today, is not a Buddhist edifice. It's Muslim, and they stand side by side. But this shows you that this was very much a multi-ethnic and multi-religious society. At independence in 1948, this is actually UNU, so this is Burma's longest-serving civilian leader, talking about the Rohingya community as having been a bit of full part of society. So the country becomes independent, and they're a full part of society. They're part of it the way any other group is, the part of it the way the Buddhist majority is, the part of it the way the Christian minority is. They are part of Burmese, part of Myanmar society. So what changed? How do we go from this? How do we go from a thriving kingdom to images in the television of 900,000 civilians walking across an international frontier with just what they can carry? Well, a couple of things. In 1962, there's a military coup in Burma. This chap, named Win, came to power. He was a xenophobic sociopath, frankly, a very nasty individual. You can in your own time, you can read about this. The Economist magazine has a very featuring that outlines some of the nastiness of David. But he was absolutely adamant that the country had to be just Buddhist. That was his objective. So from the 1960s right through to the modern era, through to 2010, 2012, the military is in control of the country, and their policies were designed to Burmanize. So the majority ethnicity is a Buddhist group, the Burma, and the practice was called Burmanization. And it involved removing any evidence that there were any other religious groups in the country. So not just attacking groups like like the Rohingya, but Christians were badly treated as well, incredibly badly treated as well. Also, the forced expulsion of any group that they deem as foreign. So hundreds of thousands of Chinese, ethnic Chinese, who had been resident in the country for sometimes hundreds of years, families have been there for hundreds of years, expelled wholesale. Hundreds of thousands of ethnic Indians who've been there sometimes before the colonial era, sometimes they come in during the colonial era, expelled wholesale from the country, and an aggressive citizenship verification process. So prove that you're from here, prove that you are indigenous to this country, and they define indigeneity as beginning before the colonial era began in the 1820s. Show us the documentary proof that you were here before 1820. And I challenge anyone here to show that their family had lived in any place between 1820. It was very difficult to do. And this was an aggressive process launched against ethnic and religious minorities, not against the majority. The majority never asked to make the same, provide the same evidence. The contemporary military, so this is the group of people that led the most recent coup in Myanmar in 2021. Their attitude towards groups like the Rohingya is that they're not indigenous, they're not from here, they're colonial ones. And we're just sending them back where they came from, which is patently untrue. So by 2010, 2012, what do we see? We see a Rohingya community that has gone from living in a kingdom that they shared with their Buddhist fraternal group, their neighbours, to a situation where they're living in these sorts of conditions. It's got to take around 2015. They're denied freedom of movement. So they can't leave their village. They can't leave the state. That's definitely not happening. But they generally can't leave their village. Access to education, severely restricted. Access to health care, severely restricted. So over time, health outcomes became appallingly bad. People couldn't go to hospital and have children at home, and consequently can't get documentary proof that their children were born in the country. And then when their citizenship is verified years down the track, they can't prove that their children are from the country. And the narrative becomes they're foreign. They're not from here. So Myanmar had a political opening for a brief period of time, about 2010, 2012, where the restrictions to the military era, which had been that it was very hard to visit the country, very hard for people to leave. Military dominated the economy, they dominated politics, they dominated social life, very strict censorship of media. Mobile phones, these things were a novelty. In 2011, I remember going and people were fascinated by a smartphone because a mobile phone SIM card is a country where household income in 2011 was about $300 US. Household income annually, about $300 US. You could buy a SIM card for between $1,000 and $2,000 US. So mobile phones were unknown within the country. And then overnight, there's an opening politically, and the economy opens up. And overnight, in 2012, from being the country in the world closest to, say, North Korea in terms of access to mobile phones, you had, within just a couple of years, by 2016, you had almost 90% of the country has access to smartphones. And they have access to Facebook, which often came preloaded on the phone. Facebook engaged a very aggressive market share operation. So the free basics program. So unmetered access to Facebook on your mobile phone and to news sources, so long as you access them through Facebook. So Facebook became the internet throughout that time. So you've got that going on. And then you've got an opening of a democratic system in a sense, so a parliamentary system where 25% of the seats were reserved for the military, but contested elections for the other 75% of parliament. So basically talked up as a movement towards democracy. And in a movement towards democracy, people compete for votes, and they compete for hearts and minds. And one of the groups that did that were extreme Buddhist nationalists who felt that the opening up of the country was meaning a dilution of the Buddhist religious dominance on it. And this chap, and this is Time magazine, Time described him as Warapu. Time described him as the basic Buddhist director. He described himself, his words, not anyone else's. He described himself as the Buddhist Bin Laden. And you can see his language towards, he's talking about primarily to the Rohingya community here. You can see the sort of language that he's using. And he was, I mean, to put it crudely, he became a Buddhist nationalist influencer. He described himself, when he was criticized by Time, he described himself as, well, why would you criticize me? I'm just the same as Donald Trump. These were his comments. He said, I use the same language as Donald Trump. Why are you criticizing me? And there's a strong argument that he does, in fact, use the same narrative as Donald Trump. He is an extreme nationalist who blames particular people for the country's problems and is happy to victimize them to achieve political outcome. And we can talk about that and all that. I'll show you one of his posts, one of his posts, that Facebook had no trouble leaving on the website. This is the sorts of thing that he was posting. For full disclosure, I've made complaints to Facebook about what and Facebook replied to me saying he does not reach community standards, so his postings are going to stay. There's one instance where quite a number of us pushed it, and then it got into the media, and then Facebook some weeks later, after it's been shared tens of thousands of times, said, oh, actually, on reflection, it does reach out to those issues. But what does this all mean? Well, what it means is that a political environment was being created in that country. A political environment was being created in that country that could enable very bad things to be done to victim groups. And that could occur without there being meaningful political opposition. So media portrayals in any positive sense of groups like the Rohingya became incredibly rare. Any talk that the group was Indigenous became controversial. It's historically incorrect, but it became controversial and problematic and opened up the person who would make posts to not just criticism, but also quite aggressive engagement from other people on social media and even in the public media. So in 2017, the Myanmar military decides it's going to do what it's always wanted to do with the Rohingya, which is forcibly deport a lot of them, a whole lot. And this is probably where many of you come across this week. It's where you know them from. You'll know them from 2017. Here's state media's view about what went on in 2017. There's all the political context where this group has been marginalised, taken from part of society, to excluded from society, to been portrayed as foreigners, and now you can see here they've been portrayed as terrorists. The most galling image here is state media, the global new light events. The most galling image here is surely the image. This is what the military wants you to know. This is not someone reporting on what they did. It's the military saying, we are ready to render assistance. But those pictures were taken many weeks after the military's already cleared that community of Rohingya gone, and that's taken. This is the military burning the homes to the ground to make sure they can't come back. And Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have both documented this extensively. Human Rights Watch, I think, has got satellite images that you can still see online. See that the villages were burned once the deportation occurs. So 2017, 900,000, between 800,000 and 900,000 Rohingya forcibly deported from what we were retired 2 months. forcibly deported from their homes, genocidally deported, described as a human rights catastrophe, described as the UN investigators describe the situation as genocide. I as a scholar do, International Association of Genocide Scholars very clearly makes clear that it was genocide. And they walked across the border. You can see two young men carrying an elderly relative. That's how they arrived in Bangladesh, and they today live in the world's largest refugee camp complex. It's adjacent to the Myanmar border. Some of the camps, you can see the border. You can see your former home. There's a fence. And you could, I visited one of the camps as there was still people coming across the border. And they were pointing out where smoke was rising from their former homes. One young man was saying, that tree there, I know that tree because it's next to where I lived. And that's how close they are. We're living in shocking conditions now in Bangladesh. Just to give you a sort of a brief sort of explanation of what the camps are like. Here's people lining up to collect some food. Centers for Disease Control is described as a humanitarian emergency, and you've got upwards of 10% of people not having access to clean water. I'll just give you one statistic. Of children under 6, half are victims of stunting and they're anemia. This is half of those children. Now, 55% of the camps are children. Third of camps report some element of disability in their household. So health needs are immensely high. And I guess where I want to leave this is to point out that this group were excluded from society over time. It took the mobilisation, the use of social media, the unregulated use of social media. Consequences are that you've got close to 1 million refugees living in camps with very little prospects of returning home, victims of victims of trafficking to other places, victims of shocking health consequences within the camps. No hope of having a job or going to university, even getting a school education has become incredibly difficult. Enabled by social media used by people who wanted to achieve precisely this aim. They normalized hateful rhetoric against this group, and the outcome is that a previously well-integrated community are victims of a genocidal forced deportation. And I suppose how I would end it is to say to you today, if it can happen to that well-integrated community through the use of normalized hate rhetoric using media tools for social media, if it can happen to them, it can happen here and anywhere else. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. You pointed out that footage can have a nationalistic and violent face. That is not, we don't take it for granted. Usually we think that politics with the regional nationalities, but certain historical and political circumstances can change violence and extreme fundamentalism. So thank you again for your presentation. Now, actually, there are the time. Yes, we have the last presentation, and it's from Mr. Dimitris Kondoudis, who is the coordinator for training professionals in how to identify potential human trafficking victims. He is an A21 staff since 2017. Also worked as 1109 human trafficking hotline call operator and as hotline manager. He is also a student in counseling. So, floor is yours, Mr.
I'll be very brief. I will do in English. So, not to change the atmosphere. So, my name is Dimitris Kontoulis. I work as a trainer professional on how to identify possible victims of human trafficking. And I'm going to do a brief presentation of the only organization in Greece that deals only with combating human trafficking. So, in the spirit of the conference of healing humanity, our practical way of healing humanity is one soul at a time. As we speak, and as last night we had a presentation, actually here in Greece, there was the police did a raid and took some girls that members of our organization went there to do interviews with them and see and help them stay if there are victims of human trafficking in order to receive help and the traffickers to be persecuted. So human trafficking is right here, right now, as we do this conference. So the only thing I want to share is that our organization started here in Greece in 2008 because of our founder, who is an Australian Greek lady, that when she found out what is human trafficking, she couldn't sleep. She just wanted to do something about it. So she did a research and found out that Greece is a country of destination for victims of human trafficking and also a transit country for all over Europe. At the time in 2008, we don't have migration and refugees, but we have people from the Balkan area and the Eastern European countries that are victimized in Greece in sexual exploitation and labor exploitation and forced begging. So when our organization started providing support for the survivors, the idea was on healing humanity that we need to prevent them from becoming victims. So the organization started an office in Bulgaria and Sofia because most of the victims were coming at the time from Bulgaria, and since then they still are one of the largest populations in Greece. And then in Ukraine and other countries, and now we are going to celebrate 15 years, and we are with 19 offices in 14 countries in the world. Our goal is to stop slavery in the 21st century. That's why the name is A21, which means abolishing slavery in the 21st century. So our goal is not just for people to receive support. Our goal is for them to become autonomous and independent, because human trafficking creates people that their mentality and behavior is to be, submissive and easy to be manipulated. So if we don't solve this, if we don't heal this, the people will be vulnerable to being trafficked again and again. So right now, we operate in 3 axes. The first is to inform the general population about human trafficking, because Greece doesn't know what human trafficking is, and they cannot understand where it's happening. They will describe situations that are clearly human trafficking, but because they don't have the knowledge, they don't understand. We also educate vulnerable populations that are already in our country, and this is our informational part. The second part, we try to be active in rescuing survivors. So we have the 1109 the hotline that operates since 2012, 24/7. There is always an operator speaks English or Greek, and there is translation in about 2 minutes to over 200 languages. So from there, we receive information for possible victims that we forward to the anti-trafficking police departments in Athens and Thessaloniki, where we have very, very good and close cooperation, and we consider them as colleagues because they share the same mentality and care for the victims, and not just following after the perpetrators. And the last part, in identifying victims, we also provide legal services. We provide, we help with identities, do interviews with the survivors. And the last part, the most important, is we have specific facilities here in Thessaloniki and the staff to provide services to the survivor. in order for them to deal with the trauma of the experience, learn how to have life skills in order to continue with their lives and be helped and support psychologically and mentally in order to be strong and to follow up with their trips or whatever they want to do. So I want to close saying this. In a theological area and with so many doctors and teachers, I want to share as a Greek Orthodox that operates in such an organization that for me, my ideal for what I'm doing is that Christ himself moved from heavens, came to the earth, and then further to Hades to save humanity. And he gave us the example to do the same. And we can do this by just being educated and know where to refer our suspicions, not our full knowledge about it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Koulouris. I think your work was the best way to conclude this first panel, your methodological approach. Congratulations for your work and your efforts in this field. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that we don't have time for discussion and talking because the coffee or the tea, I don't know, the tea, no. It's ready and it's not going to have a all. So thank you very much all the speakers.